I call on the Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I move the motion in my name. The Scottish Government has been consistent in our calls for the UK Government to right the historic wrong suffered by the WASPI women. The First Minister and I were pleased to meet WASPI campaigners on the 19th of December during the rally here at the Scottish Parliament, which allowed us to emphasise the Scottish Government's continued support for their cause and reiterate that we stand with them and that we always will. Can I also welcome those who join us in the public gallery today once again? However, I share their deep frustration and indeed anger that this debate even has to take place at all. But it is necessary once again to come together to show and to vote on our support for the WASPI women. I hope that here today we can come together and show solidarity with their campaign, to send a clear message to the UK Government that their handling of this issue has been unacceptable and that compensation should be paid at the earliest opportunity to all women affected. When the PHSO report was published last year, this Parliament held two debates, which both heard widespread support for compensation to be paid. In fact, when the former First Minister Humza Yousaf specifically asked if a future UK Labour government would pay the compensation, Paul O'Kane confirmed, and I quote, "Labour is very clear that we support the principles contained in the PHSO report, which includes the principle that we must compensate those women." So, Presiding Officer, it would be helpful to know what exactly has changed since the election of a UK Labour government. Because the report in question clearly identified maladministration by the DWP through their failure to act promptly by writing to all of the women impacted by the changes in the state pension age. Now, the Scottish Government is absolutely clear that it is vital that the UK Government takes responsibility for these failings, and importantly that this includes delivering a full compensation package as recommended by the Ombudsman. And I also call on the UK Government to listen to the WASPI women's call for a comprehensive compensation package, taking into account the financial hardship suffered, coupled with the UK having one of the worst gender pension gaps in the OECD. Because a gender pension gap which Age Scotland analysis identifies as 39% in the UK, which gradually increases over the course of the average woman's working life. Research by the Pensions Policy Institute found that for women to retire with the same pension savings as men, they would need to work an extra 19 years. And by the time the average woman reaches her late 50s, her pension wealth is equivalent to less than 2/3 of a man's. It's time to stop letting women down. Now, the PHSO report criticises DWP maladministration when communicating the equalisation of state pension age for men and women, and it recommends that the DWP compensate women born in the 1950s by between £1,000 and £2,950. The Ombudsman investigated complaints that since 1995 the DWP has failed to provide adequate and timely information about the state pension age and the number of qualifying years needed to claim the full rate of state pension. Now, the report found that while some timely and accurate information was available, too many women did not understand how they personally were affected by the changes to the state pension. This was highlighted to the DWP, but they chose not to adequately use the research from the Work and Pensions Committee and the National Audit Office to improve their service and performance, which the PHSO report stating, and I quote again, "In this respect, the DWP did not demonstrate principles of good administration. This was maladministration." Presiding Officer, despite this report being published in March and the Ombudsman taking the very unusual step of asking the UK Parliament to intervene on behalf of the women and of the Ombudsman themselves, last year the previous UK Conservative Government failed to make any clear commitment on delivering the compensation that was recommended, instead pledging only to consider the report. And despite words of support from numerous Labour politicians standing with WASPI women in marches and in photos and appearing in newsletters the length and breadth of the country, who promised a lot more than just an apology, the WASPI women have feeling let down once again. That's why so many women feel betrayed by the new Labour government. Because when the previous Conservative government was pushed to deliver the compensation on the back of the report, the then Chancellor's assertion was that any compensation had to be fair to other taxpayers. Now we have a Prime Minister stating that to compensate the affected WASPI women would be a burden to the taxpayer. Well, as I have previously said in this chamber, the only fair approach to this issue is to ensure compensation is paid to these women at the earliest possible time. And I would also like to point out to the Prime Minister and to the UK Government that the only burden here is the burden of responsibility that is now on them to fairly compensate those affected by the maladministration of previous UK governments. Presiding Officer, the official response of the UK Government was quite remarkable, quite astonishing. It accepts the PHSO's findings, it apologises for the DWP's maladministration, but refuses to financially compensate the WASPI women as, I quote, it would not represent good value for taxpayers. Surely we can all agree, if you're willing to accept responsibility for your actions, you should also face the consequences as laid out by an Ombudsman report. But as highlighted by the PHSO themselves, the DWP had already, and I quote, indicated it would not comply with our recommendations, and that is why 9 months ago we asked the Parliament to intervene. Now, in response to the UK Government's decision, the chair of WASPI, Angela Madden, expertly pointed out that this is bizarre and totally unjustified move, which will leave everyone asking what the point of an ombudsman is if ministers can simply ignore their decisions. What indeed is the point, Presiding Officer? We heard in the debate last week that was held by my colleague Kenny Gibson from many speakers from right across the chamber, hearing and telling the stories of their constituents and their constituents' reaction to the decision of the UK Government. And also not just about the reaction, but the impact that all these decisions have had. What struck me when we were hearing those statements was the clear themes that came through there. The theme of betrayal, disappointment, anger, all exceptionally valid feelings, considering that these women have heard plenty of lines of support and promises of better times under a new UK Labour government. However, when it was elected, it seems that they were nothing more than empty promises. Now, this government and the SNP MPs have been consistent in their support of WASPI women, and this support has never wavered. In fact, prior to the UK elections last year, SNP MP Alan Brown tabled a bill with cross-party support calling on the UK Government to publish a compensation framework for WASPI women set at £3,000 to £10,000 or more. Something the WASPI campaigners also feel would be a fairer outcome given the wider financial hardships this devastating maladministration has caused. Now, that compensation, which includes that wider hardship point, remains the position of the Scottish Government. However, in order to allow this Parliament to speak with one voice, our motion today is simple. Deliver justice for the WASPI women by implementing the recommendations of the Ombudsman on the compensation payment. It's as simple as that, Presiding Officer. Because, as my colleague Maggie Chapman mentioned in a previous debate in this Parliament, every 13 minutes a WASPI woman dies. A woman who might have lost several years' worth of her pension dies without justice. Presiding Officer, this issue has affected around 336,000 women in Scotland. Women who deserve acknowledgement for the wrongs they have faced and who deserve to be fairly compensated for the mistakes of previous UK governments. Some, because of the UK Government's inactions, will sadly never see justice delivered. Across the UK, the number of WASPI women who have passed away since 2015 without seeing justice sits around 308,000. 308,000 women. That's a staggering figure, which should cause anyone who has not supported this campaign to hang their heads in shame. Presiding Officer, it can't be enough to describe today the difficulties that these women have gone through, and indeed, because of that, how extraordinary they are. We're talking about a group of women who, despite setback after setback, broken promise after broken promise, continue to seek justice, continue to campaign with the utmost dignity and continue to hold those in power to account, despite the financial and the very emotional toll that this no doubt has on them and their families. Their tenacity should be an inspiration to all of us.
Monica Lennon.
I'm grateful to the Cabinet Secretary for giving way and support her remarks so far. I hope she's right that the Parliament will speak with one voice today. Can she give an update on any discussions between the Scottish Government and the UK Government on this matter?
Cabinet Secretary.
Certainly, there have been numerous letters and debating points that we have discussed with the UK Government. And what I would say is I stand ready to send yet another letter to the UK Government after the debate today. And I hope to be able to say that we have voted unanimously to support the WASPI women. But that is up to Ms Lennon's party and others to come to that conclusion at decision time. Presiding Officer, the women have already fought an uphill battle in terms of pension savings equality, and this injustice mirrors other pension injustices such as the wider pension gap that I mentioned. What women didn't expect is a Labour UK Government to make the situation more difficult for them. Surely, the first new UK Government in 14 years should be aiming to learn from the mistakes of the past and, in the case of the WASPI women, ensure mistakes are rectified as soon as possible, with any future changes to state pension age being clearly and thoroughly communicated. And yet, what have we got? We've got more of the same excuses, the failure to take responsibility for harm caused and failure to act. The WASPI women deserve so much better than that. Presiding Officer, while the UK Government continues to fail the WASPI women and our older people, the Scottish Government are continuing to ensure they are being provided with the support they are entitled to. Here in Scotland, we understand our older people are a diverse experience and a highly valued part of our society. Over the past few years, though, we've seen that energy prices are one of the highest drivers when it comes to fuel poverty, with increases in fuel prices having the largest impact in the change of fuel poverty rates in Scotland between 2019 and 2022. And yet we saw from the new Labour Government, one of their first policy announcements was the scrapping of the universal winter fuel payment, many recipients of whom were probably WASPI women. Yeah. So it's becoming increasingly clear just how little the UK Government regards the issues faced by the older generation as something to take action and deliver upon. Certainly.
Paul O'Kane.
The Cabinet Secretary, in her remarks there, completely fails to acknowledge the UK Labour Government's commitment to the pensions triple lock, something which I hope she shares, something we've debated before in this chamber. But does she share my concern that the party opposite now don't seem to support the triple lock anymore, which is protecting people's pensions?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I would share any concern about the triple lock being diminished, but quite frankly, Mr O'Kane's party is the one that's in government now, and he needs to take responsibility for the winter fuel payment and for the WASPI women. Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government has already set out our plans to deliver universal support to pensioners from next winter through the pension age winter heating payment. That's the right thing to do, but let's be clear that the key powers which make a real difference to energy costs remain with the UK Government, and they should act. Presiding Officer, the WASPI campaigners have repeatedly handled themselves with the highest levels of dignity as they face setback after setback. When the report was published from the Ombudsman, there was finally a tangible positive outcome, and this Parliament came together to recognise this. We rightly called on the UK Government to act on this report, acknowledge the maladministration and, importantly then, to act to deliver and provide a fair compensation package. The election of a new government brought some optimism, but unfortunately that optimism has faded away along with the promises. Presiding Officer, I said at the beginning of this speech in front of those brave WASPI campaigners that are in the gallery today, and many, I'm sure, waiting to see what happens in our votes, that this Parliament can send a clear and united message to the UK Government. I hope that all in this chamber can reach agreement on this topic, as we have in the past, And I hope this new UK government stops and listens and finally does the right thing by standing up and acknowledging that they owe these women so much more than just an apology. Surely it's time, finally time, that they are provided with a fair compensation package at the earliest possible opportunity, so that those women who have been affected finally see their compensation being paid and the amends are starting to be made for the mistakes by the UK governments of the past. And I move the motion in my name, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. I now call on Paul O'Kane to speak to and move Amendment 16160.1. Up to 11 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I move the amendment in my name. And I want to begin, as I have done in debates that I have spoken on in this topic in this chamber in my 4 years now in Parliament, by acknowledging all of the WASPI women, including those who are in the gallery today, and those who we represent in our regions and our constituencies, and in doing so offer my respect to them for the work that they have done over many years of campaigning. Indeed, I have had the opportunity, as I know colleagues across the chamber have, to speak to many impacted constituents and WASPI campaigners over the years, to listen to their views and the experiences of what has happened to them and the impact that these issues and decisions have had upon their life, and also to listen to what they feel is an appropriate remedy for them in terms of their circumstances. And I have heard, as I say, members from across the chamber will have a variety of experiences that I believe deserve to be accounted for and heard today, and a variety of views on what is required to achieve the redress that I think everyone would want to see. And indeed, a variety of views on the report that we're debating today and the subsequent issues. And I'm going to focus my comments today particularly on that PHSO report in the time that I have available to me. When I last spoke on this matter in the chamber, the PHSO report had been received by the previous government but had not been responded to. And I outlined in that debate that it would fall to any incoming government to deal with the detail within the report and to respond. And I highlighted in that debate my desire for a response to be forthcoming, and indeed my support for there to be a scheme for redress within that response. But that had to be fully considered in line with the different recommendations that were outlined by the Ombudsman in that report. So I do, Presiding Officer, recognise the disappointment that the UK Government has not taken forward recommendations to Parliament from the PHSO on the specific issues of compensation. And along with colleagues on these benches, I have been clear that I do believe that while steps have been taken to recognise maladministration, the Government could go further. I think, however, it would be remiss not to recognise that the UK Government has finally acknowledged that maladministration occurred, something that the previous UK Government refused to do, and has offered an apology on behalf of the state for that maladministration. In addition, there are commitments to taking clear action to ensure that maladministration of this kind cannot happen again. And those actions include working with the Ombudsman to develop a detailed action plan out of the report, setting clear and sufficient notice of any future changes to pension age. Presiding Officer, I am finding it very difficult to hear, I'm afraid. I don't know if that's a matter of the gallery clearing or noise from the back of the chamber.
Thank you, Mr O'Kane. I appreciate that. We'll just allow a moment for the gallery to clear.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The point that I was coming to is that there has been an undertaking to learn from this experience, to understand what the issues are and to ensure it can't happen again. But I will take Jeremy Balfour at this stage.
Jeremy Balfour.
Can I thank the member for taking my intervention? Did you think it was wrong for the Prime Minister to stand and say that he would compensate for WASPI women? Was that wrong of him to do that? And should he fully apologise for not doing what he promised to do over a number of years?
Paul O'Kane.
I think it was wrong of Mr Balfour's party not to engage with the PHSO report in any meaningful way in the last Parliament, and indeed to kick the issue into the long grass, not even offering an apology or any learning at all from the process. I don't think that Mr Balfour can stand here and give out lectures on what should or should not have been done. But I will come to the point about where I think the UK Government could go further and should go further. So I will, of course, address that wider point. But I do think the Conservative benches do have to consider the inaction of their own government, both in terms of the long 14 years they've been in power, but also in the recent past in terms of their receiving the report. The Secretary of State has tasked officials to develop that strategy for effective and timely modern communications on state pensions to ensure that nobody in the future falls through the cracks. And on the issue of apology, I do think it's important and worth putting on the record that the Ombudsman described the apology as very significant and welcomed the government's recognition that mistakes were made, and there was a commitment from the Secretary of State to make sure it never happens again. And the Ombudsman went on to recognise the disappointment that not all of the recommendations on redress have been taken forward. I'll take George Adam.
George Adam.
Just on the point of the Labour apology, could Mr O'Kane possibly tell me how much in cash terms a Labour apology is in the open market to these WASPy women who still have to pay their electricity bills, who still have to pay their pension? How much is it actually worth to them?
Paul O'Kane. Mr O'Kane, just before you go on, can I gently remind our visitors, who are very, very welcome to their Parliament, that applause or any other contributions from the public gallery are not permitted. Paul O'Kane.
Thank you. I am coming on to a point about that disappointment and what further I feel could be done. But I do think apology is important, and I have outlined why. I would gently say to Mr Adam that very often his government comes to this chamber and makes apologies on a range of issues and does not follow up with compensation. So there is an issue here that is, he asks about the value of apologies. What are the values of apologies that have been given by this government to many women across Scotland and many other issues across Scotland that haven't been fully compensated? So I do think he needs to reflect on that
hear Mr O'Kane.
as I progress. Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. So, not at this stage. I won't. I have much to get through, as Mr Stewart will appreciate. So, I do recognise the importance of what the Ombudsman has said in terms of the apology and those other actions, and I do recognise that for many WASPy women, including those in the gallery and those who will be watching today, that action doesn't go far enough. So that is the point I am coming to, which I think is being highlighted by members across the chamber. It doesn't go far enough, and that is why Scottish Labour has been clear in our calls that the UK Government should not close the door on this issue and should think again about this whole issue of compensation following the apology. And I do have to accept and acknowledge what has been said around the economic circumstances. This government, this current UK government, has inherited a horrendous financial situation from the previous government. And there has been a long legacy of unresolved issues which the new government has had to deal with, not just WASPy, but the infected blood scandal, the Horizon Post Office scandal, Windrush and others. So I just say that to set the context, that I do think that is important in terms of any decisions that will be made going forward. And I think all of us in the chamber want to recognise that very often governments have to make decisions, and as I say, there is a huge in-tray to deal with, which was left behind by the previous government. That said, and as I am coming on to outline the position of these benches, it is clear that more could be done to look at fair and flexible compensation to be provided, particularly to those who have been most adversely impacted by the maladministration, which was outlined by the Ombudsman herself in her report. And I think we will hear examples of that in the course of this debate. I'll just finish this point, if Ms McMillan will allow me, and then I will come to him. So I recognise that there are arguments made that many WASPy women were not adversely impacted by pension age changes. And if the maladministration had not occurred, it may not have made a difference. But I do think we have to drill into that in terms of what the Ombudsman has actually said. But I'll take Stuart McMillan at this point.
Stuart McMillan.
I thank Paul O'Kane for taking the intervention. Just on his latter point of paying a fair level of compensation, then surely the UK Government should be paying the full level of money that has been taken away from these WASPy women, not a bit here and a bit at some point further down the line.
Paul O'Kane.
Well, I would have to say to Ms Macmillan, and I am trying to, in a spirit of consensus, make these points relating to the PHSO report. The PHSO has outlined a number of recommendations. The Cabinet Secretary is shaking her head, but this is what's in the report. There are a number of options, either a flat rate of compensation, and I'll come on to this, or looking at individual circumstances. And the PHSO report is dealing solely with maladministration and not looking at the wider issues of detriment. And that's something we debated previously under the last First Minister when we had these debates and discussions, and trying to design a system, I think crucially, in conjunction with WASPI Women, that can seek to give the redress that is required to a person because of their individual circumstances. So, as I have said, and as I am trying to outline to the Chamber, I have spoken with many different WASPI women who have had different experiences, and their experience of maladministration and the injustice towards them has been different, and they have very often different views of how recompense should be made. So I do think it is important that we look at all of the recommendations that the Ombudsman has made and try and come to a system that will particularly allow us to address those who have had the most detriment to them in terms of that maladministration. Because I do recognise that many women, often from lower income backgrounds, were at greater risk of being adversely affected by that maladministration, and I do believe that they were put at a disadvantage because of the late notice that was issued to them. And indeed, that's a position explicitly recognised in the report in paragraphs 495, 97 and 98, which read that not all women born in the 1950s will have suffered an injustice because of the maladministration in communicating the pension age. However, it is likely there will be a significant number of women born in the 1950s who suffered injustice because of maladministration in the DW's communication about the 1995 Pensions Act. I will take the Cabinet Secretary at that point.
Cabinet Secretary.
Grateful to the member for giving me. Can we just be clear, though? The UK Government did not, in the Secretary of State's statement, say, I don't agree with the Ombudsman's suggestion and recommendation for compensation, but will go on away and have a look at it. They have closed the door to the WASPI women at this point. So that is the exact point we need to get to, is action. And surely the best way to do that, the quickest way to do that, is to support the Ombudsman recommendation. Let's get past the debate and get on to delivery.
Paul O'Kane.
As I have said previously in this speech and in my contributions on this matter, I do think it is clear that the door should not be closed and that there is a process that should be explored. And I've been very clear that's my position, that's the position of the Scottish Labour Party. We have been very clear about that. But what I have also said is there were a number of different ways women could be compensated contained within that PSHO report. So I do think the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions should look at that again and should look at all of those issues within that about how redress may be made to those women. And that is why we will support the Government's motion tonight. But it's also why I have brought that additional amendment to add to the Government's motion to point out that we have to look at redress in full and understand what people are asking of us. So I can give that on the record assurance just now. Now, I am very conscious of the amount of interventions I've taken and that we are rapidly running out of time in terms of my speaking time. I know that we will hear contributions from across the Chamber tonight about the experience that has happened across Scotland and more widely. I am clear that we will support the principle which I have outlined, and I look forward to this debate, this important debate, and continuing to move these issues forward on behalf of those WASPI women. Thank you very much, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. And I now call on Douglas Ross.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And like the two previous speakers, could I also welcome the WASPI women to Parliament today, as I did on Thursday, when, last Wednesday I think it was, we had an excellent debate led by Kenny Gibson, where we heard testimony from MSPs across the Chamber and across the parties on the work they have done on behalf of their constituents for many, many years. I've mentioned in WASPI debates before the efforts of Sheila Forbes in Murray, who was the first person to contact me about this long before I was elected, when I was a candidate. And she brought together a group of affected people in Murray, and they have continued to fight for justice, and they are continuing to fight for justice today, because they certainly don't feel they have received it from the UK Labour government. And I accept they also have major criticisms of previous Conservative government, Labour governments, Liberal Democrat Conservative coalition governments. But what I think is at the heart of what we're debating today is the PHSO report and the role of the PHSO. And I looked at their website this week, and it states this: the PHSO says, we independently investigate complaints about UK government departments. We believe complaints have the power to reveal the truth, creating lasting change and inspire a better relationship between people and public services. And I think that's absolutely crucial. That gets to the heart of what we're debating today. When you take the politics out of it, when you look at this independently, the PHSO have said there was maladministration. Not perhaps for everyone, but for a significant cohort of women, they did not receive the notification they deserved. And as a result of that, they should be compensated. And back in May last year, when we debated this, I agreed that the recommendations, which at that time had just gone to the UK Conservative Government, should be considered in full, including the question about compensation. And then we entered into the general election campaign, where I think probably every single Labour candidate in Scotland and across the United Kingdom was urging people to vote for them to deliver on the PHSO recommendations about the injustice, changing things within the Department for Work and Pensions across the UK Government, and to deliver that compensation. And then, in the first 6 months of that Labour administration, they dealt the WASPI campaigners a very bitter blow to say, well, we do think you have suffered maladministration, we will say sorry, but we won't pay you for that. And I think that is indefensible. And I think that's why, in all fairness, I like Paul O'Kane, and he is a very experienced parliamentarian. He has struggled in this debate today, because I can't, on one hand, listen to what he's saying about all of the Scottish Labour position and what they are doing to fight for their constituents and for the cause, and on the other hand, his Secretary of State at a UK level said this. Liz Kendall, and I'll give way to Paul O'Kane when I've read out Liz Kendall's response, and I'd like him to either agree or disagree with Liz Kendall. She said, when she made the statement to the House of Commons, the great majority of women knew the state pension age was increasing, and she went on to say it wouldn't be value for money for the taxpayer to pay that compensation. So is Paul O'Kane correct that these women deserve compensation, or is his Labour Department for Work and Pensions Secretary of State correct, saying that enough of them knew about it and it wouldn't be value for money for UK taxpayers?
Paul O'Kane.
I'm very grateful to Douglas Ross for giving way, and I have outlined my position quite clearly in the position of the Scottish Labour Party, in that the government should look again at the issue of compensation. Yeah. But I would very gently say to Mr Ross, who I also have respect for, and he's spoken well on these issues, he was a member of the House of Commons, a Conservative member of the House of Commons, a member of the government, a Minister of State, who did nothing in terms of when the report was delivered to that previous government, didn't consider an apology, didn't consider any lessons learned, long grasped the issue. He had a longer term in the House of Commons than I think anyone now present in the chamber. So what is it he's done? He comes here and levels these accusations at me, where I am trying to make a case about what more we need to do. What is it Mr Ross was doing?
Douglas Ross.
Can say to Paul O'Kane, that was a very lengthy answer that didn't address the point I made. I simply wanted to know if Paul O'Kane agrees with Liz Kendall, the UK Labour Secretary of State, who believes that the great majority of women knew that the state pension age was increasing and it wouldn't be fair or value for money for the taxpayer. I don't think it's a difficult question to ask. It sounds like it's a difficult question to answer for Paul O'Kane. But on his point, what did I do? I voted against my government. I was the first of my intake to do so. He also made the point in his response to Jeremy Balfour's intervention that the UK Government had plenty of time to look at this. The UK Government got this report in March and the election was called in May, so 2 or 3 months to look at it. Why then, if Paul O'Kane believes the Conservatives should have responded to it within that time frame, did it take 6 months for the UK Labour Government to respond to this just before Christmas? And I have to say, it was possibly the worst Christmas present for the WASPI women to have that taken away from them at that point. We have debated this, as I've said, a number of times before, and I think it is right that we continue to bring the testimony of WASPI women to this chamber. I have to say it was done expertly by Carol Mochan, by Katie Clark and by Mercedes Vialba on behalf of their constituents, and the Labour representative speaking in Kenny Gibson's debate last week. And I also think we had an opportunity, because I made this point, and I'm not saying the government did it because I said it. In fact, it was probably more likely that they wouldn't do it because I said it. But I made the suggestion that if the government brought forward a very simple and straightforward motion today, we could get unanimous support around the chamber for it. That's why myself and my colleagues decided not to amend the motion today. I think it is very clean, it is very clear that if we vote for the government motion today, it sends the strongest possible signal to the UK government that they should reconsider this and they should deliver the compensation. I understand and I accept that compensation is not at the level that every WASPI campaigner would want or would expect, but it is a start. because the PHSO looked at this, not just for weeks or months, but for years. They went into very significant detail about the complaints, the response from the DWP, and came up with these conclusions. It is a thorough report, and I think it sends out the most worrying and concerning message that parliamentarians, be that here or in Westminster, can just cherry-pick and take some parts of the report and say we agree with this, but not the more difficult parts to deliver, such as the compensation. And that's why I think the Labour amendment today is trying to get some kind of praise, to say that they have acknowledged that there was maladministration, to say that they have apologised for that. That is not enough. It's almost like Labour want patted on the back for going two-thirds of the way, but not the final ultimate way to deliver that compensation. So I don't think that amendment was necessary, but as it only adds to the motion that we have in front of us today, and it doesn't remove anything, then fine. We are using it perhaps as a debating point, but I do think the cleanest and clearest message from this Parliament tonight is to unite behind the Scottish Government motion, because it does simply say respond to this PHSO report, including the point on compensation. I'll give way again to Paul O'Kane.
Briefly, Mr O'Kane.
I'm very grateful to Mr Ross for taking another intervention. It was simply to make the point that the add-on amendment was about a statement of fact in terms of the apology, and also setting in context exactly what he just said about the varying asks in terms of compensation and trying to reflect that. So it certainly wasn't about trying to defend a position. It was about trying to enhance what this chamber is saying with one voice.
Douglas Ross. Thank you, Mr O'Kane. I think you made your point. Douglas Ross, thank you.
It's a statement of fact that Labour want to be congratulated for apologising and accepting there was maladministration. They might get congratulated if they did what the PHSO said they should and pay that compensation. In my final moments, I want to mention the Age Scotland briefing for Kenneth Gibson's debate. I thought was excellent, and they said, as the Cabinet Secretary did in her opening remarks, that there are 336,000 women affected by this in Scotland. I looked at my own Highlands and Islands region. If you look at the local council areas in the Highlands and Islands Western Isles, 1,890 women affected. Orkney, 1,520. Shetland, 1,380. Argyll and Bute, 6,670. Highland Council region, 16,430. And in my home area of Murray, 6,240. That is replicated in every single local authority across Scotland, in every one of our constituencies and regions. That's why this issue is so important. That's why we have very determined campaigners in our gallery today who are continuing to take this fight to the UK Government to deliver. And another point I took from the Age Scotland briefing was they said the PHO report offered a glimmer of hope that a resolution would finally be delivered. Well, sadly, the UK Labour Government have so far extinguished that glimmer of hope. I think we can reignite that tonight by this Parliament uniting behind the motion to send the strongest possible message to UK Labour Government ministers in Westminster that they do need to reconsider, they do need to offer compensation, and they need to do it quickly. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Ross. I now call on Maggie Chapman. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome all the WASPI women campaigners in the gallery this afternoon, although I share the Cabinet Secretary's anger and frustration, which I'm sure pale into insignificance in comparison with what the 1950s-born women feel. While it's always good to have a catch-up with Linda Carmichael from Aberdeen, none of us should have to be here again. Because many of us, of course, were here just last week discussing the same issue as part of Kenneth Gibson's Members' Business debate. But we make no apology for returning to it so soon. For this scandal, and it is a scandal, represents a major injustice to women across the United Kingdom, including, according to Spice estimates, over 11,000 women in Aberdeen City, more than 16,500 in Aberdeenshire, nearly 8,000 each in Angus and Dundee. Across the North East region, the total number of women affected, the WASPI women, is estimated as 43,730. Each of these women has been affected in a different way, with different impacts and challenges depending on their individual circumstances. But all of them have two things in common: their gender and their age. These two factors have made successive governments relaxed and comfortable with decisions and failures to make decisions that have caused immense hardship, heartache and loss. Baroness Ros Altman saw at first hand how the interests of the WASPI women were dismissed and disregarded, with information absent or misleading. And I'm quoting from her own words, written in 2018. She says, "As Pensions Minister, I kept trying to find a way to alleviate the unfairness of these short-notice changes. Unfortunately, there was no sympathy for these women. Ian Duncan-Smith, as Secretary of State, refused to engage with the 1950s women adversely affected, and I was instructed not to speak to them. I was told the women would go away sooner or later." She spoke too of the lifelong inequalities that the WASPI women have faced, getting a particularly raw deal in pensions across their lives. And she went on to say, and again I quote, "Even in 2015, when women's pension age had already risen to 62, some pages on the government's own websites said women would start their state pension at 60. Yet the mostly male ministers did not appreciate many women's lives are not the same as men. Without private pensions to fall back on, these short-notice changes to state pension age are likely to cause hardship for many." End quote. And of course, they have caused hardship for many. As the WASPI campaigners, including those in the gallery this afternoon, have reiterated, the issue is not with the equalisation of pension age, but with the lack of notice given, the failure to consider or to care about its effect on lives, livelihoods, relationships and futures. That lack of notice has, of course, affected partners, families and communities, all those who rely on the availability of retired women to give care, voluntary work, emotional and practical support and energy. But most of all, it affects the lives of the women themselves. As Linda Carmichael and others have pointed out, many of the WASPI women began work before equalities legislation, when marriage alone could end a career, and maternity leave was a thing of the future. As Close the Gap explained in their excellent briefing, the pension systems that we have were designed to reflect men's traditional working patterns, to meet their needs. That fact, and the pension gap which it creates, is still a reality for young as well as older women. Women still have fewer opportunities for earning, for advancing their careers, and for paying into their pensions. At the same time, with longer periods of retirement and more likelihood of needing care, their smaller pensions need to stretch further, leading to longer and deeper times of poverty. Linda Carmichael has spoken of the financial and emotional difficulties experienced by many, including those going into debt and losing their homes. And research cited by Close the Gap shows that postponement of the pension age causes, and I quote, "detrimental impact on women from lower socio-economic groups, including widening health disparities, poorer physical health, and an increase in self-reported depression." That's why we should be especially concerned with the WASPI women in areas of multiple deprivation across our country. Women in our communities have borne heavy burdens and continue to do so, supporting families and neighbours through the pandemic, through the housing emergency and extreme inflation. It is the height of injustice to add this further weight to what they already carry. And differing environments affect the chances for WASPI women to make up some of their loss. I'm thinking particularly of women in rural areas of Aberdeenshire and Angus, where there are fewer employment opportunities as well as fewer transport options. And, as Close the Gap again have highlighted, the situation is especially unjust for many disabled women, racially minoritized women, divorced women, self-employed women, and women who have been lone parents. This, Presiding Officer, is why I have stood in solidarity with the WASPI women outside this Parliament, and why I speak for them here once again, calling for the justice which is long overdue. As George Adams said in last week's debate, those women did everything we asked of them. Can the government at Westminster do the one thing we ask of them? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Chapman. And I now call on Beatrice Wishart. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I too pay tribute to the WASPI campaigners across the country and welcome those in the gallery today. Scottish Liberal Democrats will be supporting the motion this afternoon. And I hope the Scottish Government's motion is concise enough to garner support from across the Chamber to send a strong signal, a strong message to the UK Labour Government that their decision not to pay compensation for the DWP's maladministration to the affected 1950s women is wrong. Liberal Democrats have long supported a just outcome in line with the Ombudsman's findings for the group who have become known as WASPI. Last week I spoke in Kenneth Gibson's similar members' debate, supporting the call for compensation to be paid. Liberal Democrat MB colleagues also took part in a Westminster Hall debate last week, supporting the call for compensation. Liberal Democrats in Westminster requested data from the House of Commons Library, which, using population estimates, indicates that around 3.5 million women across the UK could be impacted by this decision, and that's estimated to be more than 300,000 women in Scotland, over 1,300 in my own constituency. I'd like to thank Age Scotland for their briefing and highlighting the shocking figures that just under a quarter of single pensioners who are women live in relative poverty. Two-thirds of pension credit claimants are women. And by their late 50s, women's pension wealth is equivalent to less than two-thirds of men's. The Labour Party should be ashamed to even contemplate ignoring these women. Women who have all their lives faced adversity through a different time, a man's world, taking everyday rational decisions about their lives to look after children, parents, loved ones at the expense of earning. A generation of women without maternity leave or free childcare, who have contributed to the economy, often in multiple low-paid jobs and taking on the caring role for parents and relatives, thinking they could retire at an agreed age only to find the goalposts had been moved. The generation who have done so much to fight for women's rights. What is indisputable is that the UK Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman's independent report recommended that the UK Parliament urgently identify a mechanism for providing an appropriate remedy, recommending financial compensation to the women affected. The PHSO itself has described the UK Government's decision not to act on its recommendation as, and I quote, extremely rare. My MP colleague Wendy Chamberlain stated in a Westminster Hall debate, and again I quote, that it is really important for the Government to help us to have trust in institutions such as the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman by adhering to the decisions made by it. Wendy Chamberlain also followed this up with a question to the Leader of the House of Commons, Lucy Powell. In response, the Commons leader stated that, and I quote, an apology was issued, but we did not feel that the compensation being proposed was proportionate or would be a fair use of public funds at this time. So just what does a fair use of public funds at this time actually mean? It means that this is the Labour Party's choice not to deliver compensation, one they can reverse to rectify the injustice they have already accepted warrants an apology. Not only is this Labour Government's decision cruel and unusual, threatening to allow millions of women across the UK to face poverty, undermining an independent institution that helps the functioning of the state, it's a betrayal of women who thought that voting Labour would see justice for the WASPI campaign. Before the 2024 general election, the Prime Minister was happy to be photographed with WASPI campaigners. The Labour Party has always declared itself to be a party of equality, the party of Harriet Harman and Diane Abbott, who for decades have championed women's rights and challenged misogyny. And I want to pay tribute to the Scottish Labour colleagues who spoke in the WASPI debate last week. That may not have been easy, but often it is hard to stand up for what is right. And I call on the UK Labour Government to do so and compensate those affected. To conclude, Presiding Officer, the Conservatives left our economy in a shambles, but pensioners shouldn't be asked to pay the price. The Liberal Democrats will continue to support the WASPI campaign. The UK Labour Government must urgently change course and rethink its shameful decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Wishart. We will now move to the open debate. I would advise members that at this time we do have a bit of time in hand, should members wish to make or take interventions. And I call Emma Harper to be followed by Megan Gallagher. Ms Harper.
Presiding Officer, I would normally start by saying I'm pleased to speak on a subject, but today that's not really the case. This is for many reasons, but none more so than the complete injustice faced by WASPI women in Scotland and the rest of the UK at the hand of successive UK Tory and Labour governments. I've met many WASPI women across Dumfries and Galloway and the Scottish borders. Many of these have been scammed out of the pension that they ought by right to have and which were led to believe that they would receive. I do, however, want to thank all of the WASPI women, including in Dumfries and Galloway and the borders, for their tenacity in standing up to the UK Government and in continuing to campaign for justice. Like others, I welcome the WASPI women to the gallery today. And following the UK Government's shocking decision to ignore the Ombudsman's recommendations and refuse compensation, WASPI campaigners have simply redoubled their efforts. WASPI women are spreading information through their local networks, appearing in local and national media, staging protests and events, and lobbying politicians. They are certainly not taking this decision lying down, as they certainly shouldn't. The message on the placards outside Parliament were clear: no notice, no letter, no pension. And I know myself and my colleagues will do all we can to support these women in the efforts in the face of a two-faced Labour government. Presiding Officer, it has now been 30 years this year when the events that we're discussing today were set in motion with the 1995 Pensions Act. That was before this Parliament even existed. WASPI women had been told, appallingly by the Prime Minister, Chancellor and media, not to mention numerous shameful Labour MPs, that they will not be compensated because, and I quote, most 1950s women born knew the state pension age was increasing. And, Presiding Officer, this is entirely inaccurate. The statistic which is being bandied around is from a 2006 survey, that's 18 years ago, and actually refers to a general awareness across the population about changes to the state pension age in the future. The survey did not ask if people knew about the specific impact of state pension ages to them as individuals. And to add further insult, only around 5% of the survey respondents were 1950s-born WASPI women. Let me be crystal clear about this. The Department of Work and Pensions knew that a huge cohort of 1950s-born women were unaware of changes to their pensions, agreed internally that they should write to them. So the DWP agreed internally that they would write to the women and agreed that doing so would make a difference. These were the conclusions of a thorough and independent review by the Ombudsman, and it's exactly why the Ombudsman ruled that this was a clear case of maladministration. So to try and rewrite or deny the history is appalling. Presiding Officer, as many as 3.8 million women were given the news that their state pension age was going to increase from 60 to 66, just as they were about to retire. Too late to do any proper financial planning. It's estimated that well over 300,000 women in Scotland were impacted by the WASPI pension scandal. Many were already in ill health or worse, and others had taken early retirement and were planning to get by until the age of 60, when they thought they would receive their state pension. While the UK Government delays in the hope that WASPI women will just go away, the campaign for justice continues. But as many as 40,000 women are dying each year without getting any form of compensation. This is absolutely shameful. Across Dumfries and Galloway, in the last session of Parliament, I held several WASPI engagement events for WASPI women. I was supported by the fantastic older persons champion from the Scottish Borders Council, Councillor Elaine Thornton-Nicholl, as well as being supported by a local Dumfries resident and WASPI and pensions campaigner, Anne Ferguson, MBE. Both should be thanked for their dedication to pension equality and for their support of WASPI. And indeed, many colleagues, including Claire Haughey and Christine Graham, should also be thanked for their campaigning. And of course, I was in the debate last week when Kenneth Gibson spoke and led the debate, although I didn't speak in that debate last week. Following these events, and even just in the last few days, my office has been in contact with local WASPI women. The one thing they say is how shocking it is Labour MPs, then in opposition, could stand with placards with the WASPI women calling for justice to now defend their Labour bosses and throw WASPI women out in the cold. It is galling and shows the true heart of the Labour members. After so many public commitments, the Labour UK Government's position is utterly indefensible. The question for Scottish Labour MPs is this: will they do the right thing and stand up for older people in Scotland, or will they stand up for a pledge-breaking Prime Minister? My WASPI women constituents don't have much hope, but, Presiding Officer, in closing, the UK Government must reverse its decision. It must accept the Ombudsman's findings in full and provide the compensation to WASPI women urgently. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Harper. I now call Megan Gallagher to be followed by Marie McNair. Ms Gallagher.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And before I begin, may I refer members to my register of interest, as my husband works for the Department of Work and Pensions. Last year, I and others took part in a debate following the publication of the Health Service Ombudsman's inquiry into the changes of the state pension age for women. And the findings couldn't have been clearer. The report called on the UK Parliament to identify a mechanism for providing appropriate remedies for those who had suffered injustice. The maladministration and the DWP's complaint handling undoubtedly caused women unnecessary stress and anxiety, and of course the inability for women to make informed decisions about their own personal autonomy and financial control. WASPI Women have spent years campaigning for compensation. They've taken to the streets, they've contacted elected members in all chambers and have raised their profile to force Parliament to act. They have been critical of my party, they've been critical of Labour in terms of what has happened in recent weeks. But we need to accept those criticisms. It's about moving on and it's about finding a resolution for those who have been impacted. Because for those MSPs who stood up and spoke in the last debate, we were all clear in our convictions that the recommendations contained within the report should be implemented. So why are we here debating another debate on the WASPI situation and the Ombudsman report? Well, to put it bluntly, Labour are struggling in government. We've already witnessed issues such as national insurance contributions. They've increased. The family farm tax has been introduced. Winter fuel payments have been cut. And now we're seeing the betrayal of the WASPI women. Labour politicians have spent years promising the world to those impacted by the changes to the state pension age. They've committed themselves to compensating women, only to reject the Ombudsman's recommendations. And sadly, but it's true, no matter what Labour MSPs say today, the fact is their Labour government has denied WASPI women financial compensation. And I get it. Being in government is tough business. But at the end of the day, Keir Starmer stood alongside WASPI women in opposition and promised them action. And it's been mentioned again already, he was photographed with a pledge that read, "I support fair and fast compensation for 1950s women." Well, he's broken that promise. The statement announced a few weeks ago was devastating to women who felt that they had won their hard-fought campaign. And again, as Douglas Ross referenced within his contribution, when Liz Kendall delivered the news, she said that given the vast majority of women knew the state pension age was increasing, the government do not believe paying a flat rate to all women would be a fair or proportionate use of taxpayers' money. But this was the same Liz Kendall who was pictured just before the general election holding a banner that stated, "I will work with WASPI to identify and deliver a fair solution for all women affected." Well, I guess it's clear that delivery is not a strong point, but this recent episode outlines what is wrong with politics, and that is broken promises. I mentioned winter fuel payments earlier on, but it is a similar story. Labour cut the winter fuel payment right before we entered our winter months. Pensioners already worried about heating and energy costs were dealt a devastating blow. That's 900,000 older Scots that are going to lose their benefits, and since we have witnessed freezing cold temperatures, particularly in our most rural areas. I certainly will.
Paul O'Kane.
I appreciate Megan Gallagher is now broadening her debate here to talk about policies that affect and impact pensioners across the country. I wonder if she can confirm whether she supports her leader's comments on the triple lock, or whether she is committed to protecting the triple lock for pensioners across the country.
Megan Gallagher.
Kemi Badnock's already clarified what she said, Paul O'Kane, but I am talking about broken promises here. And if you look at the WASPI campaign, if you look at the winter fuel payment, it's broken promise after broken promise by this Labour government. And again, when we look at the situation here in Scotland in relation to the winter fuel payment, we will see the winter fuel payment reinstated in some form next year. But that's not going to do any good to any older person who has had to turn their heating off and sit in a freezing cold house this year, because not just one but two governments have not reinstated the winter fuel allowance. We simply cannot continue to let our older generations down. Presiding Officer, we can talk all day about the disastrous decisions this new Labour government has made. We can watch Scottish Labour try to set themselves apart from Keir Starmer and Liz Kendall. But it won't wash, because WASPI women won't be compensated, no matter what Anas Sarwar says or what any of his colleagues say in the chamber today. So with that, Presiding Officer, the Scottish Conservatives will vote for the Scottish Government motion today and for the Labour amendment, because the recommendations are clear. I supported them last year and I support them today. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Gallagher. I now call Marie McNair to be followed by Katie Clark. Ms McNair.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Last week I spoke in my colleague Kenneth Gibson's members' debate calling for compensation for the WASPI women. It was important to speak in firm support of the WASPI women and to have WASPI women in the chamber, including some of my constituents. And I welcome them all here again today. I said it last week and I'll say it again today. Despite the Ombudsman report being clear on the failures of the UK Government and being crystal clear that compensation is owed, Labour's policy is to ignore this. This contradicts what Labour said to get elected in 2024. A conscious choice was made to use these women to get elected, but only to abandon them straight after. Labour promised change, but all the WASPI women got was betrayal and deception. When the Labour Government can promise tax breaks to the wealthy but not compensation for WASPI women, it's clear how much they value pensioners. And this is not a question of money, but about Labour's priorities and their attempts today to their amendment to wipe away any notion that so-called Scottish Labour want full compensation for women. And Paul O'Kane said in his speech about options. What options? What, handshake, a medal, a new Labour mug, some Marks and Spencer's vouchers? It's complete and utter nonsense.
Yeah. Paul O'Kane.
Oh, you're going to get mansplained to you.
I'm very grateful to Marie McNair for taking an intervention. The options which I'm referring to were outlined in the PHSO report about the levels of compensation. So I think it does a disservice to this debate to be standing there shouting about medals and mugs, when actually we're trying to have a serious debate here about the levels of compensation that were outlined by the PHSO. I don't know if she has maybe read the report, but there is clearly options within it.
Yeah. Marie McNair.
Presiding Officer, I certainly have read the report. I thought Paul O'Kane was standing up to apologise to our WASPI women and explain why your party is refusing to pay compensation to these women. But absolutely not. So, effectively, all I got was political spin and an aggressive, shouty man. So, to move on, I call on colleagues opposite to get off your knees and honestly push for full and fair compensation for these women. Recent figures show this change to pension age affected over 13,000 women across my constituency, and one woman who was affected is Liz Daly, coordinator of WASPI Women. Liz was expecting to retire at 60 in December 2015. In the summer of 2014, Liz's husband took ill and was hospitalised for months. When he was discharged with a walking frame and feeding tube, Liz took compassionate leave and later reduced her working hours to care for her husband. During a work meeting, she found out she would not, in fact, be able to retire at 60 after all. But by this point, she had already reduced her hours and the other half of her post had been filled, all without knowing the pension age had changed. Liz was faced with an impossible situation and undue stress, all while taking care of her sick husband. And when her husband did die in 2018, Liz was only earning half pay. Choices were removed for Liz and so many other women, and they had known about this. Liz and so many other women could have prepared and made different choices and different decisions. Liz's story is heartbreaking, but it is important to hear. And these are real women who have faced a terrible injustice And these are women who have already at a disadvantage. They've historically been earning lower pay on average during their working lives or experienced interrupted careers because of caring for children or as unpaid carers. They've also had less state pension entitlement than men due to earning less than the National Insurance lower earning limit and spending less time in the labour market. And as noted in a policy briefing from Age Scotland, a 2024 report by Pensioners Policy Institute found that by their late 50s, women's pension wealth is equivalent to less than 2/3 of men. These women were robbed of their pension, and there is simply no justification for the Labour Party to deny them compensation. Time is unfortunately not on their side, and I know many WASP women have sadly passed away without receiving compensation. And since that decision on the 19th of December, I'm sure the figure is 3,500 women who have sadly passed away. Absolutely shocking. WASP women have shown determination and courage, but Labour have just absolutely forgotten about them. They've spent considerable time advocating for change and raising awareness of their plight. So therefore, they don't deserve to be betrayed in this way by the Labour Party. They must be compensated, and the SNP is on WASP's side, and we will remain so. Labour's call for a change of direction, but they are unfortunately already giving the people of Scotland one. I've got to say this is one of the most right-wing Labour governments in history, and that is saying something. And this current government is making Gordon Brown look like Fidel Castro. And I can understand why former Labour MSP has said this about Keir Starmer. There's something deeply wrong and sinister about someone who takes apparent delight in making children, pensioners and low-paid poorer, and their lives more difficult. It's immoral, shameful and disgusting. And that's from one of your Labour guys. I don't get that one, but there we go. And what reasonable person can disagree? Labour's treatment of WASP women has been and continues to be disgusting. Pre-election calling for them to be compensated and posing for photos, but post-election saying to compensate is an unreasonable burden on the taxpayer. Presiding Officer, only one government in the UK stand with WASPy, and that's this SNP government. Despite Labour student politics shenanigans, the WASP women know this, and they know Labour have betrayed them, and they will never forget it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms McNair. I remind all members to speak through the chair. I now call Katie Clark to be followed by Kevin Stewart. Ms Clark.
I speak in this debate today in support of the calls of WASPy women across the country for fair compensation and for the recommendations of the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman to be implemented, and for all options to be considered to look at how we provide financial compensation, particularly given the financial circumstances of many of the women affected. I welcome the contributions that have been made across the chamber and hope that this Parliament will speak with a unified voice today. I very much hope that the UK Government will reconsider its decision not to award any compensation to WASPy women. I also join others across the chamber who have welcomed WASPy women to the Parliament today, many of whom I've worked with for a number of years in the cross-party group. They have campaigned on behalf of women born in the 1950s who were affected by the decision to raise the pension age for women from 60 to 65 and then to 66. The Ombudsman found the Department of Work and Pensions guilty of maladministration in the handling of the changes to women's state pension age and miscommunication following decisions on the equalisation of the state pension age. They found the implementation of these changes inadequate due to maladministration, confusing advertising campaigns and lack of timely communication with those affected. This was an independent process which looked at all the issues, and that process should be honoured. The recommendations deal with the maladministration issue only and do not relate to full compensation. However, it is important for the integrity of the Ombudsman system that the Government honour the recommendations of such an independent process, and for that reason also it is important that WASPI women receive compensation. And I think those are points that Douglas Ross made earlier in the debate. As the Ombudsman's report outlined, only 43% of affected women were made aware of the changes to their state pension age. As a result of the changes, many suffered a significant shortfall in expected retirement income, to the detriment of their financial confidence, health and well-being, and had to wait many years for their pension. These changes impacted over 3.6 million women. Yes, happy to take an intervention.
Tess White.
Thank you, Katie Clark, and I'd like to commend Katie Clark for the work that she has done on the CPG, the WASPI CPG with Beatrice Wishart. Can I ask Katie Clark if she's raised this with Keir Starmer, Liz Kendall, Angela Rayner and Rachel Reeves, and strongly, and what have they said to her back?
Katie Clark.
I have raised it with UK colleagues, but I also have had discussions with many of those involved in the package that was in the 2019 general election manifesto, which had a costed compensation package for women. And I believe we need to look at all options in terms of the compensation that is made available to WASPI women. And we have to be very honest that full compensation would be very expensive, many tens of billions of pounds, and the 2019 general election manifesto wasn't full compensation but was a tapered scheme. But it still was £56 billion. These changes have impacted on 3.6 million women across the UK, which is why full compensation is so expensive, and over 336,000 women in Scotland are affected. As Maggie Chapman said in her speech, many of these women had limited opportunities when girls and young women, and indeed throughout their lives, and the world has changed in many ways. At that time, women did not have the same opportunities as pay as men. We still don't, but for many of these women, when they started work, the equalities legislation wasn't even in place. I welcome the UK Government's acknowledgement of the injustice and losses suffered by WASPI women, and indeed the failures of the Department and Work and Pension. However, I believe that the decision not to compensate this group of women, particularly after the Ombudsman had considered the issues, was a mistake. Women born in the 1950s entering the workforce in the late 1960s and early 70s were expected and sometimes had to leave work if they married or had children, and many women paid the small stamp. This group of women were affected by decades of systematic inequality in the workplace. And as Age Scotland's briefing for the members' debate last week made clear, many women in their late 50s pension wealth is considerably less than men's, and indeed equivalent to less than two-thirds overall, 62% of men's pensions, which explains why so many women claim pension credit. I am pleased this Parliament is discussing this issue today. I hope a unified message comes from this Parliament today. Many politicians have campaigned with WASPI women who were given hope that there would be a successful outcome. I therefore support the motion, I support the amendment, and I call on the UK Government to reconsider its decision.
Thank you, Ms Clark. I now call on Kevin Stewart to be followed by Jeremy Balfour. Mr Stewart.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And I too welcome the WASPI women to the Chamber, and in particular to my own constituent, Linda Carmichael. We probably see one another far too often, and I hope at some point we'll be able to meet after resolution of this particular issue. Paul O'Kane talked about others kicking the ball into the long grass. But Liz Kendall has burst the ball and run away with it. But she did say sorry. And what annoys me most, Presiding Officer, is the Labour amendment today. And the words, the weasel words, the UK Government should look at all options for remedy. The Ombudsman has already come up with a remedy. It's on page 88 of the report. You can't miss it. It's right there under the title Financial Remedy. But seeing that Mr O'Kane, who isn't in his place at the moment, hasn't read it, I'll read it out for him and for the rest of the Chamber. Section 489. We have explained our thinking about where on our severity of injustice scale the sample complainant's injustice sits. We would have recommended that they are paid compensation at level 4 of the scale. There you go, a remedy from the Ombudsman, which is absolutely crystal clear. Labour needs to get its finger out and pay it. It is as simple as that. Now, I want to look, Presiding Officer, at some of the other detail of the scandal, and it is a scandal. And I think it is important to look at the detail of what the Ombudsman has said about UK governments and where they have gone wrong. Let's look at it. In 2004, 6 years out, Westminster had research showing that information about pension age changes had not reached the women who needed it most. What did the UK government do with that research? Did they tell the women? No, they ignored it. They buried it. Downing Street knew it had to do more in 2004, but didn't bother. Now, of course, a cynic could point out that a general election was just around the corner, and a letter arriving on every doorstep in the UK telling women that they needed to work 5 more years would hardly have been a vote winner. But 2 years later, in 2006, they had another chance to do something when yet another survey found that too many women still thought their pension age was 60. And what did they do? They dithered and delayed. They could have written to the women in 2006, but no, they started a feasibility study to report back in 2008. It was so bad that by 2007, with only 3 years to go, the DWP itself considered telling the Ombudsman that it should prepare for complaints, but decided not to because the Ombudsman might ask them to actually do something. Then finally, in April 2009, just months before the first WASPI woman turned 60, the first letters went out. So this isn't just a story about a Westminster establishment that doesn't care about women. It's a story of political ineptitude from start to finish. From the first report in 2004 under Tony Blair to 2009, there were 6 different Cabinet Secretaries for Work and Pensions in the Labour government, and not a single one of them lifted a finger for the WASPI woman. Now, I know that many in the Labour Party today still think that Tony Blair can do no wrong. And so it's not surprising that one of his acolytes, Keir Starmer, has blocked compensation to WASPI women to protect maybe the tattered legacy of his mentor, Mr Blair. However, this cover-up and denial can't continue. The UK government must accept that the independent ombudsman has ruled that Westminster failed the WASPI woman. The UK government must accept that the independent ombudsman has ruled that the UK government should pay WASPI women compensation. We shouldn't be having this debate. We shouldn't have to call on the UK government to do the right thing by WASPI women. There should be no debate. The entire point of an ombudsman is that they have the final and impartial say on the matter. And the ombudsman has had their say. And what the Ombudsman said is absolutely crystal clear. The women affected are owed compensation. Those aren't my words. They are the words of Rebecca Hilsenrath, the Chief Executive of Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman. What is the point, Presiding Officer, of an independent ombudsman if the Prime Minister and a government and a party simply ignores them when they do not like the answer? It is time to do the right thing. It is time to compensate the WASPy woman. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Stewart. I now call Jeremy Balfour to be followed by Willie Covey. Mr Balfour.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. If we're honest with ourselves, a lot of people across the United Kingdom are totally disillusioned with politics. They are sick and tired of politicians promising them one thing only to turn round and pull a rug out from under voters. At the election last July, the Labour Party made a slate of promises regarding a number of policy issues. The British public took them at their word and decided to give them a chance to form a government. They voted for a specific set of policy propositions. As it turns out, the now Prime Minister has no intention of honouring his word. He was willing to say whether he needed to get into power and then go about walking back all the promises that he made. He promised that he wouldn't raise taxes on farmers who worked so hard to put food on the table up and down the country. And then he introduced the farmers' tax. He promised that tuition fees for universities would rise only to raise them in the budget. He said that he would not punish pensioners before ripping money from their pockets by axing the winter heater payment, sentencing many of them to a long, cold winter. And finally for now, to add insult to injury, he walked back his promise to compensate the WASPy women. He made it a huge talking point during his time in opposition. He either didn't understand the financial impact of what he was asking for in opposition and only figured it out when he got into government that there are hard choices to be made about expensive policies, or he was simply dishonest with the people that he stood beside when he had photos taken with it. He made unequivocal promises to the WASPy women. He and his Labour shadow cabinet went round the country promising them that they would be compensated if he was to be Prime Minister. And he simply has misled them, and he's misled the British public. Either he doesn't understand the financial impact, or he was simply willing to lie to get votes. Either way, this does not paint a good picture of people who are supposed to running our country. Presiding Officer, at this point, the individual policy of WASPy compensation is not actually the core issue, as important as it is today. Of course it is disappointing, even devastating for many, but this episode of politicians behaving badly shines a light on a much deeper issue. How can we trust anything the Prime Minister or his allies do or say? They're willing to say anything but not follow it through. If they're willing to pull the rug out from under vulnerable pensioners, then who else is in danger of losing vital support that the Labour has promised will remain in place? Presiding Officer, we live in a situation that shows over and over again that people do not trust us. And with the decision that this UK government has made, you can see why that is the case. They want honesty, but they haven't given it to us. People thought they could trust this Labour government, and already 7 months into it, they have been deeply let down. We all need to learn from this lesson that if we say something, we deliver it. And that is why we're calling on this Labour government to do that immediately, to honour the promise, to honour the WASPI women and pay the compensation that they are not only entitled to, but they are due and should be given immediately. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr Balfour. I now call Willie Coffey to be followed by Carol Walkin. Mr Coffey.
Thanks very much, Presiding Officer, and what a privilege it is to be able to speak in support of the WASPI women in this debate, to speak for them and to tell their story of how they have been robbed by the British Government. The Great Pension robbery is not over yet, and the people of Scotland must sit up and be aware of what's happening, or they will pay a heavy price. The measure of a great country is surely not how much they can rob from their own citizens to bail themselves out, but that's what's happening here. Great Britain up to its eyes in debt to the tune of £3,000 billion, frantically looking around to see what it is left to sell off and who it can grab money from. The answer, the pensioners. Easy targets as ever for the British Government. First, Presiding Officer, a glimpse back into recent pension history to help us understand why we are where we are today. Gordon Brown started the ball rolling in 1997 when he abolished the dividend tax credit that the pension funds benefited from, resulting in a direct £5 billion grab for the then Labour government that basically cost pensioners £250 billion over the following 20 years. What an achievement that was. The worst Chancellor in history until Kwasi Kwarteng took the coveted title during his spectacularly short month in office in 2022. Not to be outdone by Gordon Brown, the Tories made sure that an extra 8 million pensioners have been dragged into the tax net during their 14 years in office, meaning that the number of pensioners now paying tax has risen by 42%, courtesy of them. That leads us neatly to the current debate. A British Tory government setting up an investigation into the WASPI pension scandal that finds maladministration has impacted millions of women, which recommends compensation, then the UK government does nothing about it except to say, sorry, it's unaffordable. They must surely have known the price of compensation when they supported their own calls for it. Not once has Labour said if it wasn't for the 22 million's black hole left by the Tories, then they would gladly pay the WASPI women their compensation. They just decided they weren't paying it, ever. And that's that. No wonder the Ayrshire WASPI women called Labour lying, untrustworthy hypocrites. And for an Ayrshire woman to say that is probably putting it mildly. Promises and pledges all dumped now that they're in power. And as I said at the outset, the British Government has always treated pensioners as the easiest targets to take money from. I remember, as colleagues in this chamber do, all the pictures of Labour would-be MPs and MSPs in this place, all desperate to get their pictures taken with the WASPI women campaigners. Some of them think they can delete history by deleting those pictures from their social media feeds. But they're still there, and they will haunt these Labour politicians for years to come. Presiding Officer, for most people, apart from the wealthiest, the pension is all that a person has to see them through the rest of their life, at the end of their working life. It's an investment by the people from their own earnings while working, required by the government, so they can have some level of comfort in later life. It's their money, Presiding Officer. Labour seems to have forgotten that. It's not the British Government's to keep, to repurpose or to blatantly steal. It's state robbery, and there's no other words for it. So hand it back. Are we finished there, though, Presiding Officer, do we think? You'd better not think so, because dear old Labour is planning another pension grab for the rest of us. At the moment, unused pension savings are typically paid tax-free to sons and daughters after a parent passes away. But from April 2027, Labour is planning to grab 40% of your unused pension savings over a certain threshold in those circumstances. Another pension grab this time via inheritance tax. So I say to people listening to the debate who think they're safe, think again. They're coming for your pension savings now. Presiding Officer, I mentioned at the start that no great country should do this kind of thing to its own citizens. To target the most vulnerable and weakest in society is not a sign of greatness. It's a sign of duplicity and greed. Presiding Officer, the quicker Scotland frees itself from this bleak future, the better. And I'm delighted to support the Government's motion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Coffey. I now call Carol Mockin to be followed by George Adam. Ms Mockin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. May I start by saying without any hesitation that the WASPI women deserve compensation, and where such an injustice has occurred, it is the job of government to rectify it. I thought this many years ago when this problem first arose, and I continue to think this now. I value the work of the WASPI women in my region and right across Scotland, and I thank them for their determination in the fight for compensation. I am glad the UK Government have apologised for this injustice, and I recognise this as an important step towards a resolution that reflects the scale of damage done. However, it is simply not enough. And as my colleagues have stated, that we will continue to urge our party in Westminster to relook at the Ombudsman report. And I'm pleased that we will be voting for the Government's motion tonight. When meeting with WASPI women directly, I have heard their story and their fears about the serious impact this process has had on their lives and will continue to have. Their stories have moved us all, and it would not be right for me to hide from comments that I have made in the past. And so I have chosen to speak in this debate and debates previously in this Parliament. Having spoken in the debate last week, I might repeat some of the points that I made, but I believe it is important to set the scene for this generation. It is impossible to argue that women born between 1950 and 1960 hadn't had to fight their whole lives for equality. Many of these women started their working life at a time when workplaces weren't structured to support or welcome them. Now, at the end of their working lives, they are told that their efforts have not been recognised in the way it would for a man of the same age. Starting their career was also likely prior to the Equal Pay Act in 1970. Other members have mentioned that. Now, at a time when they would have had to leave work, perhaps when they got married or had children. These women have now been disadvantaged further through serious mismanagement by the state when communicating how they would receive their pension. The Ombudsman determined that the DWP decision-making between 2005 and 2007 led to a 28-month delay in starting to send letters to 1950s-born women about state pension age changes, and that these delays were maladministration and led to injustice. And Scottish Labour recognises WASPI women will be disappointed that no compensation will be offered and that an apology from the Government is not enough. Presiding Officer, the pension changes that were introduced by the Pensions Act 1995 and the Pensions Act 2011 were not only poorly communicated but handled with no respect for the women affected. Women were just years away from retirement and they suddenly found that they had to work longer. And that did cause financial and emotional distress. As we know, over 300,000 women in Scotland have been impacted by this scandal. We have a responsibility to those women and, where possible, for them, and I hope that we can do so tonight. The decision to bring the age change forward in the Pension Act 2011 across the UK, as I've said, brought financial and emotional distress for women across Scotland. Those affected have had to adapt rapidly and in many cases completely change their plans for the future to make up for that financial loss when anticipating what the retirement would look like. As the Scottish Government motion states, in March 2024, the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman revealed the Tory Government's failings and said that these women deserve compensation. Therefore, the refusal from the Government that we have seen thus far to provide any compensation is unacceptable, as we have heard across the chamber tonight. Without the ability to properly plan for the future, the emotional impact has taken a concerning toll on those women, and many people have raised those stories. And for some, that can become quite insurmountable, and this has serious mental health implications, which, as a campaign, the WASPI Women have fought repeatedly to expose. The situation has led to serious struggles to afford the necessities of life, whilst also experiencing anger and disappointment, and I think quite rightly, towards a system that does not seem to value their contribution and a system that does not work for them. And as I've said, although appropriate, the acknowledgement and apology from the UK Government does not do enough for these women who have been short-handed and turned away throughout their lives. It is important that the apology was made. In the case of those most adversely affected, the lack of any compensation is ultimately life-changing, and we must recognise that. We can all recognise the economic disaster the government has to deal with, but the decades-long fight these women have had to wage in order to expose government's failings is not something that an apology is going to suffice in rectifying. In a country where the pension age gap is sitting at 39%, we need to do more to heal the deep wounds of the past. The current decision by the UK Government is simply not acceptable to WASPI women and their families, who have provided so much to our communities and to the wider economy. In this Age Scotland briefing, we know that women are far less likely to feel confident about being comfortable in retirement, and this is deeply worrying, and much more needs to be done. So I am pleased that my party is going to support the motion tonight. I hope it will be supported across the Parliament, and that we can work together to get the compensation that these women deserve. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Mochan. I now call George Adam to be followed by Monica Lennon. Around 6 minutes. Mr Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, it was last week that I spoke in my friend and colleague Kenny Gibson's debate, and I opened it up by saying I'm sick of this. And I remain sick of having to listen to Westminster Government after Westminster Government make excuses why they can't support the women that are in this chamber here tonight. That ends up almost in a rage because I have to watch that I remain to my written text and don't actually tell you, Presiding Officer, what I really think about the UK Government and their duplicity in this issue. But so it is with deep conviction and a heavy heart I speak about women born in the 1950s, our WASPI campaigners who have been so shamefully let down by successive Westminster governments. Many of them are here today, and quite a few of them are from the great town of Paisley, a town that is well known for its strong female role models, so much so it was the basis of my very first speech in this Parliament in 2011. But growing up, it was my own mum who taught me what was right and wrong, gave me the power to dream and hope for a better future. It was my gran, Marion Adam, who worked in Fergusley Mill all of her life. Being a mill lassie, she was never shy at putting her own point across and debate or have an argument. She was the woman that taught me to never start a fight. Make sure you finish it, son. And it's my wife, Stacey, who breezes through life with a smile on her face, despite living with 4 chronic health conditions. Never giving up and always strong. And it's like any other man in here, when your daughter is born, it's like when Jessica was born. I vowed to be a better man. But these WASPI women are the mothers of other families in our communities. They are the wives, they are the aunts, they are the grandmothers, they are the same role models for their families. They have spent their lives contributing to our society, paying into a system they believed they could trust. Yet that trust has been betrayed. The Ombudsman's report, published last year, condemned the Department of Work and Pensions for its maladministration of the state pension age changes. The UK Government's response? A shrug. A broken promise. And now, under the new Labour Government, led by a Prime Minister who once condemned this as a historic injustice, what do we hear? Excuses. Empty rhetoric. A refusal to deliver the compensation that these women deserve. This betrayal is pure and simple. It knows no party lines, it knows no red or blue. Presiding Officer, I want to once again tell you why this fight means so much to me personally. In Paisley growing up, I was surrounded by strong, resilient women. Women like my mother, women like Stacey. These role models shaped my values and my determination to fight for justice. So how could I look at them in the eye and stay silent and such an injustice, so blatant injustice and cruel injustice happens from the UK Government? Our SNP government has stood firmly with the WASPI women from the very beginning. From the moment the Ombudsman final report landed, we demanded the UK Government act swiftly. We made it clear that these women deserve compensation, and it needs to be an amount that acknowledges not just the maladministration, but the financial and emotional toil this injustice has wrought. Presiding Officer, in Scotland alone, 300,000 women were affected by this scandal. Women who, on the cusp of retirement, were blindsided with the news that their pension age had been raised from 60 to 66. News delivered far too late for them to prepare financially. And the reality of this betrayal? Over 40,000 WASPI women die every year waiting for justice. Many of these women are struggling. Half report difficulties paying essential bills. A quarter cannot afford food. This is not just about pounds, shillings and pence. It's about dignity. It's about fairness. And that's why I asked Paul O'Kane how much a Labour pledge was worth, apology was worth in the open market. These women do not want some sanctimonious apology. They want to see the money. They want you, the Labour Party and the UK Government, to show them the money. But make no mistake, this is a Westminster problem. The PHSO was clear this maladministration lies at the heart of the UK Government's failure to communicate changes effectively. It was an error they must fix. Yet instead of action, we have seen delay. Instead of leadership, we have seen indifference. Presiding Officer, I want to address my Labour colleagues directly. Do the right thing. Stand with us. Do not prop up a pledge-breaking Prime Minister. When Keir Starmer campaigned in 2019, he called this historic injustice out. Where is that conviction now? Do not let the WASPI women become a footnote on your history of betrayal towards them. This Parliament has spoken before on this issue, demonstrating unity and urgency in calling for justice. Let's do the same again today. Let us send a clear message to the UK Government that the UK Government that Scotland stands with these women, our heroes of our families and our communities, while they are being cast aside by the UK Government. Let us remember, Presiding Officer, trust is the cornerstone of any democracy. People pay into the system with the promise for security later in life. When that trust is broken, it is our duty, our moral duty, to rebuild it. WASPI women are not going away. We can see that today. Their campaign, their resilience should inspire us all. They have faced down Tory indifference and now Labour duplicity. They will not be silenced, and neither will we. Presiding Officer, I urge this Parliament to unite once more and demand justice for these women. Together, let's hold Westminster accountable and deliver the dignity and fairness our WASPI women so rightly deserve.
Okay, I now call Monica Lennon to be followed by Christine Graham. Around 6 minutes. Ms Lennon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm grateful to you for calling me to speak. I didn't know I was going to get 6 minutes, so I might not take up all of that time, but thank you, because it was really important for me that I put on record my support for the WASPI women, because it really matters to my constituents in Central Scotland. It matters to WASPI women across Scotland and the UK, but it matters to the people in all of our constituencies and regions. And I want to add my words of welcome to the WASPI campaigners who are in the gallery, and I'm sorry that you have to continue this battle. It is disappointing, in fact that's an understatement to say it's disappointing that this debate is necessary, but here we are today. And we're here because women affected by state pension inequality deserve justice, and no one today has argued against that. And there can be no justice without fair compensation. While an apology from the UK Labour Government is welcome, and it is really welcome, it's not enough, it's not good enough. It is undeniable that the Labour Government has been handed a tough inheritance after 14 years of Tory chaos. But 1950s-born women are not to blame for the constraints on public finances and government is not powerless to act. And I don't think the purpose of this debate today is to explain or justify why the WASPI women should be compensated. Those arguments have been won. But this is a moment for this Scottish Parliament to unite. And I think that's what we're doing today. Everything I've heard today tells me that we are united. And after decision time today, when I hope we speak with one voice, then UK ministers must play their part. They must listen and they must reconsider and work with us towards a just outcome for the women. We've heard some really good contributions from colleagues in the Chamber today. We heard a frank but fair speech from my colleague Beatrice Wishart, who I know spoke in the recent members' debate in support of the WASPI women also. And to Beatrice Wishart and to other colleagues who are wondering, it's not just Labour women who are furious and frustrated, it's Labour men too. It's our members, it's our supporters. And that's why we're not here to get a pat on the back for speaking with our colleagues today, but it's to also show that party democracy is as important as the democracy of the country. So I think it's good that we have space in our Parliament today to come together to debate these issues. It's not easy. No one is saying it's easy to find the way to get the compensation in place. But we do have to act fairly and we have to act fast. I follow on the contributions of other Labour colleagues today, including Katie Clark, who is heavily involved in the cross-party group on WASPI, as colleagues know, and can speak from experience from the development of Labour policy in the past. So we do have knowledge and insight that we can lean into. And my colleague Carol Mockin made some excellent comments, as did my colleague Mercedes Villalba in the debate last week. So I hope I'm putting across the fact that this is very much a live debate and discussion within the Labour Party. It's why my local Labour Party in Hamilton, Lark-Colin Stonehouse, organised an emergency meeting on the 6th of January, the day when most people were returning to work after the Christmas and New Year break. And at that meeting, an emergency motion was agreed. And that motion is very clear that the decision announced by the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions on 17th of December is not right. It's not the right decision. And the motion is clear that the women should be suitably compensated. And the text of that motion also referenced a motion that was passed by our local authority, South Lanarkshire Council, back in November. And I make these points to show that there is support, widespread support for the WASPI campaigners, and that we do have to step aside. There's lots in here in this chamber that we can debate about what the UK government is getting wrong, what the Scottish government is getting wrong, what we'd all like to see all parties do better. But on this one issue, we can come together. So what I want to say today, on behalf of my constituents, on behalf of my local Labour Party members who have asked me to speak up on this matter, is to say that no government gets everything right. But on WASPI, the UK government is in entirely the wrong position. My plea today is not to think again about what the women deserve, but it's to recognise that the government is getting it wrong, but it's not too late to act. So today I'll be voting for the motion and for the Scottish Labour amendment, and I hope that we will continue to use every opportunity to speak out and to call for action, because the UK government must do the right thing.
Thank you, Ms Lennon. And I call the final speaker in the open debate, Christine Graham. Again, around 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. I too welcome the WASPI women and the opportunity to contribute, as I did in the members' debate last week. I also declare an interest as a pensioner, although I am fortunate in that I missed the change in pension age, being born in the mid-40s, though my 3 younger sisters were affected. What was expected back then was that women would aim to get married, leave work to have children and perhaps return later, but broadly speaking not to have a career, or if they did, interrupt it for the children, as I did, leaving my then teaching profession for 6 years. There was no formal childcare then. There was an assumption that the married woman would have her husband's pension to rely on, as well as her own smaller pension, paying therefore what was known as the small stamp, which is what I did. Any woman's employment pension was also reduced with those years out. Now, that's how I recall those years anyway. However, while life has its ups and downs, there was that constant, the retirement age of 60 for women, a contract between women and government, founded in trust. It was secure. With changes in life expectancy and work patterns, change was on the cards, and I don't think there's an argument about that. I think WASPI women do not dispute the move towards equalisation, but it was the way it was done. Not only the lack of proper information, but with a brutal loss of pensionable years. That has left many women in penury. As a divorced older woman myself, I had to plan and calculate how I could pay off my mortgage in line with my retirement. This I had in common with many women, single, including widows and divorcees. To then extend state pension age by up to 6 years sabotaged financial plans. We already had a smaller state pension, and it's only by chance that I am still working. The financial penalties for women are high. For example, 23% of single female Scottish pensioners live in relative poverty. 66% of pension credit claimants are women. 66%. In cold numbers in my constituency, as many as 5,630 WASPI women in Midlothian and 8,740 across the borders have lost out, many of whom have tirelessly campaigned for decades to right this wrong. Now, WASPI women, as I say, have no argument with equalisation of pension age, but it was the way it was done, with immediate financial change, compounded by the failure to publicise and inform of the changes, which is what the Public Health and Services Ombudsman found in his report, which was confined to the question of maladministration by the DWP, that in not properly informing the women affected, they deserved and should be awarded compensation. In other words, not compensation for lost pension, which is another injustice, but compensation only for failure to inform so they could adequately adjust their financial future, in the lower thousands, not in tens of thousands. So I'll quote from the report. Quotes, complainants told us that the Government Gateway website incorrectly stated state pension age for women was 60 as late as 2016. Close quotes. New quotes. Complainants have told us they did not see any of the publicly available information because, for example, they didn't read magazines, didn't see leaflets, or had no reason to visit benefits agency offices. As they say that, because they had no reason to question their state pension age, they did not request information. Last quote. Given the scale of the impact of the DWP's maladministration and the urgent need for a remedy, we are taking the rare but necessary step of asking Parliament to intervene. Close quotes. The emphasis, rare but necessary. Which brings me to Labour. The DWP has now said introducing such a compensation scheme for women born in the 1950s would be, quotes, neither fair nor feasible. Contrast that with rare but necessary. Now in government, their MPs have erased many of their online comments in support of the WASPI women just as quickly as they stood for photo ops with the campaigners. And now, as evidenced, frankly, by the amendment, Labour UK branch office is alive and well. Today, Labour have nowhere to hide, even in that amendment. Each of the 14,000 plus across my constituency is an individual. So I will end with the words of Claire Ramage, who had to take early retirement at 58 and establish the Borders WASPI group. Quotes, I was told that to get my state pension, I'd have to apply for it. So at 58, I contacted the DWP to better understand how I go about this. I was then told that I would not get my state pension until I was 66 years old. I was shocked and said, but you never told me, to which they replied, we didn't need to. I felt powerless for the first time in my life. Who was going to fight for me as there was no union to help? And that's when she set up WASPI in the Borders. Obviously, we now have the Ombudsman's findings that indeed the DWP did not inform these women about the changes to their pension age to give them time to set up alternative pensions. Finally, it angers me to see how we have been used by the Labour Party, who fully supported us, signed petitions, got their pictures taken, for what? Just votes? Close quotes. These are Clare's words. I couldn't say it better myself.
Thank you. We now move to closing speeches. I advise the Chamber there's a little time in hand, and I call Maggie Chapman a generous 6 minutes. Ms Chapman.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The strength of feeling in this Chamber this afternoon is palpable. From across the Chamber, of course, but also, as is to be expected, from the gallery. Anger, frustration, a sense of betrayal and grief. As we've heard from across the Chamber, this is an issue of justice, of social justice, because what WASPI women have experienced for far too long is a scandalous injustice. We've heard this afternoon and at previous occasions when we've debated this issue, the stories, sometimes harrowing, of women struggling for food, struggling for warmth, struggling for their families, for dignity, for hope. The Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman's report last year offered WASPI women a little bit of hope. The Ombudsman made it clear that compensation is the right and proper course for the Westminster Government to take. And, as Kevin Stewart said earlier, the UK Government should listen to that independent view. That's what it's for. The amount of compensation recommended by the Ombudsman was, in my view, and that of many WASPI campaigners, much too low. But that's an issue that I hope we will have the opportunity to explore further at a later date. Meanwhile, though, the essential principle stands that compensation is properly payable. That was the bit of hope so sorely needed in what has felt by many to be pretty bleak times. But that hope was dashed cruelly by the UK Labour Government just before Christmas. This UK Labour Government, after its multiple photo opportunities with WASPI women, has given them what? An apology? That might be welcome by some, as far as it goes. Some find it insulting. And, as Linda Carmichael eloquently put it, an apology doesn't pay the bills. So what is it doing? What is the government doing? The decision not to pay compensation to the WASPI women stands alongside Labour's continuation of the cruel, punitive and widely condemned two-child limit and its ending of the universal winter fuel allowance for older people. Last Christmas was bleak indeed. What do these policies have in common? They all target women and other marginalised people. As Karen Adams suggested in last week's members' debate, there is more than a hint of misogyny, both in the way the original policy was implemented and in successive government responses. Hoping that WASPI women would just give up and go away is a disgraceful way for any government to behave. But for a Labour government to dismiss calls for compensation for gender injustice is utterly shocking. To be generous, we might suggest that the government needs to do a bit of work, or a lot of work, to understand how its decisions affect women. Gender and human rights budgeting are practical tools which it would do well to learn to use. But there's more to this than just ignorance. These policies are looking like a deliberate attempt to set generations against one another, to suggest that what Keir Starmer calls the taxpayer doesn't care about the well-being of either children or older people. It's nonsense, of course, but dangerous nonsense. And it's a game we refuse to play. Child poverty, pensioner poverty, migrant poverty, all are connected. 400 years ago, John Donne penned the words, "No man is an island." Well, neither is any woman, especially not a WASPI woman. We share common needs for sufficient income, yes, but also for shared services, clean environments, cohesive communities, loving families and friends. We share hopes for the future and fears too, and all of those involve other people. So the fight of WASPI women is not for them alone, not for the tens of thousands in the North East and beyond. It is for all of us who care for one another, who care about justice, about keeping faith with the promises we imply as well as those we make explicit. It is for the benefit of the trust in good relationships between people and public services. It is for the good of children who need their grannies and the communities who need their volunteers. It is for the integrity of our politics and the recognition of right. The WASPI Women fight encapsulates all of this. And it is long overdue. Too many of the North East WASPI women have already passed away without justice. Many more leave us as we speak this afternoon. They cannot, they should not wait for justice, and neither should we. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Chapman. I now call Michael Mara. Generous 7 minutes, Mr Mara.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I start by recognising the wrong done to so many women born in the 1950s and as laid out by the Independent Ombudsman? The Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman found that by failing to alert them to the changes, there was maladministration by successive UK governments. The result is that many women were let down by the state which they fund, which they are constituent parts of, and which general faith in has diminished over recent decades. In that context, it is absolutely right that the UK Government has, on behalf of the state, apologised to those women who were affected. And it is right, too, that Paul O'Kane, MSP, stated at the outset of this debate today on behalf of Scottish Labour that we recognise the grave disappointment of so many at the lack of accompanying compensation. Certainly.
Douglas Ross.
Michael Mara has just reiterated that Paul O'Kane was speaking on behalf of Scottish Labour. Does that include Scottish Labour MPs at Westminster? Do they agree with this position? Do they believe compensation should be paid, including the Secretary of State for Scotland, the Under-Secretary of State for Scotland, other ministers? Is this a Scottish Labour position for MPs as well?
Michael Mara.
The member knows fine well how government works in that regard. I haven't been a member of it. And if a member of the government, who is a member of Scottish Labour, I will vote with the government position. Labour MPs across those other benches, I think, overwhelmingly support the position that's been laid out today by Paul O'Kane and other members, right across his benches. Now, if I can make some progress first, if that's okay. So, part of the debate today has rightly turned on the value of apologies. And the SNP government has apologised for many things, historic injustices by the state on many occasions, whether it be forced adoption, institutional abuse and many more. Successive SNP First Ministers have set great store by the proper conduct of the state in recognising its responsibilities in that regard, and they've set great store by those apologies. Every week, the First Minister comes to this chamber and apologises for the disastrous mess his government has made of Scotland's NHS. But that doesn't change the experience of... No, sir, I'll just finish this point if I can. But that doesn't change the experience of a patient waiting hours after hour in an A&E or being treated in a hospital corridor. And the point I'm making here is what matters is what you do as a result of the apology, when you recognise past mistakes. It's vitally important, no thank you sir, it's vitally important that we recognise those lessons on maladministration to ensure it does not happen again. And that is what the UK Government has said it will do. Indeed, the PHSO has said it was, and I quote, very significant and welcome that the Government recognised that mistakes were made. And the Secretary of State has committed to make sure that this never happens again. On this point, certainly.
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm grateful for the member developing his point, but what he hasn't once again made clear is what the position is of Scottish Labour MPs, backbenchers who stood beside WASPI women in the last election campaign. If a same type of motion was presented in Westminster, how would Scottish Labour MPs vote?
Michael Mara.
So many of the members that the Minister talks about were at the APPG last week, setting exactly the position that we've laid out today. And I fully anticipate that that's exactly how they will pursue it in Parliament if a vote is brought in the future. Now, if we can come to Kevin Stewart, who outlined one option that was set out in section 489 of the report, he would do well perhaps to go on and read sections 501, 502 and 503, because they do in fact set out other options. And that is the more nuanced approach that we think should be delivered, and that's what Labour's amendment, of which he was so critical, calls for today, Presiding Officer. I would hope that members across the chamber can unite in supporting both the government's motion, as we will do, and the Labour amendment to that end. So Shirley-Anne Somerville started out today, and I quote, by stating that the only burden that exists here is a moral one. And of course we must recognise the moral burden. But the idea that that burden, no thank you, but the idea that that exists in the absence of the burden of the economic circumstances the country faces does not stand up to scrutiny. There is no escaping the immensely difficult economic and fiscal situation left to the UK Labour government by the Conservatives. They crashed the economy, sent interest rates soaring and left working people to pick up the tab in higher mortgages and higher bills. They made promises they knew that they could not keep. They announced policies they knew the country could not afford, running down the clock to the election so that they could leave a new government to pick up the pieces. And it was an unholy mess that they left behind. And the cognitive dissonance on display from the benches opposite today beggars belief. So the UK Labour government, no thank you sir, is getting on with cleaning up the mess left by those reckless Tories. But that does not mean, Presiding Officer, that there are not difficult choices. Of course there are.
Point of order, Christine Graham.
The member, it's actually, all my buttons have come on now. It's like playing tunes. I pressed the intervention, it wouldn't light up.
What's your point of order, Ms Graham?
Pardon?
What's your point of order?
My point of order is I'm being denied the right to intervene because of electronic faults that are none of my doing.
Ms Graham, that's not a point of order. You pressed your request for an intervention. It was declined by the member. As you will well know, that is within the right of the member who is speaking. Point of order, Christine Graham.
Sorry, it isn't. The light's not coming on despite me pressing it. My right to speak has come on and I haven't touched it.
Christine Graham, if you could resume your seat, please. It is coming up on my monitor that you have pressed for a request to intervene and you've not had it. It has. Mr Mara, continue.
Officer, there have been some technical difficulties today, and I'm sure that Christine Graham I'd recognise on that basis. For a point of clarity, I will decline the intervention at this point. So I think it is, I have to say, frankly disingenuous and frankly irresponsible for any member of the SNP, Presiding Officer, for the government to suggest otherwise than there are significant financial challenges. None of it diminishes the reality for the WASPI women, but when the Cabinet Secretary states that the only burden that exists here is a moral one, is frankly not realistic or even true. In October, ahead of the UK Labour budget, the SNP made calls for an additional £70 billion of spending. Those were outlandish and unrealistic spending demands that would have bankrupted their country and crashed the economy all over again. And part of the question that members have to answer today with these demands is where would the money come from? The SNP have opposed every revenue-raising measure that the UK Labour government has proposed: a windfall tax on oil and gas giants, ending VAT exemption on private schools, increasing employer national insurance contributions. Indeed, the First Minister's suggestion, Presiding Officer, Indeed, the First Minister's suggestion that income tax elsewhere in the UK should be raised would have actually reduced Scotland's block grant by at least £636 million. The First Minister is presumably hoping people see the headline but don't ask too many questions. So can I commend the Chamber for the many heartfelt speeches that have been done today? Can I commend particularly the campaigners who have come to seek justice? I do hope that Parliament speaks with one voice today.
Thank you, Mr Mara. I now call Tess White. Again, a generous 8 minutes. Ms White.
Presiding Officer, I also pay tribute to the WASPI campaigners in the North East and across Scotland, and who are here today, who for many long years have fought with dignity and determination for their voices to be heard. The UK Labour government has betrayed these women after spending years promising to provide compensation, only to U-turn once they got into power. This has been a passionate debate today, and rightly so. WASPI women, 3.6 million of them, have had the rug pulled from under them by Keir Starmer. They've been angered by Labour's hypocrisy and its persistent attacks on pensioners. Today we heard from Paul O'Kane, and I actually think it's insulting to actually use the word disappointment. He says he recognises the women's disappointment, and all he can say is his colleagues might think again. And as I was listening to that, I was thinking, where is Richard Leonard today? Banging on the table. Here you are, Richard Leonard, banging on the table, fighting for the WASPI women. And I was delighted when I was thinking, where is Richard Leonard today? He's here, and Monica Lennon stepped in and actually did say that she was furious and frustrated. So I think that's very important. Megan Gallagher described the stress and the anxiety of all this that's been created when they had hope and they had promises from Labour. And they're not just disappointed, presiding officer, they feel betrayed, as Beatrice Wishart calls it as it is. She calls it the betrayal of Labour. Paul O'Kane, leading for Labour today, couldn't answer the key question on the U-turn of his Labour colleague Liz Kendall, given her promises when in opposition. And no one today, as my colleague Douglas Ross has pointed out, is going to pat Labour on the back. And I asked Katie Clark if she raised the broken promises of her colleagues Rachel Reeves, Keir Starmer, Liz Kendall and Angela Rayner, and she said that she had, which I'm sure gives some comfort, but sadly she's not been able to persuade them and honour the promises that they've made. Jeremy Balfour talked today about many people being disillusioned with politicians, and he said that either Keir Starmer was dishonest and it was a betrayal, or just did he get it wrong and didn't do his homework. Christine Graham today, and it's not often I agree with Christine Graham, but today she did say, quite rightly, Labour has nowhere to hide, even in this amendment. And Michael Mara, in relation to trying to answer the questions from Shirley Ann Somerville and Douglas Ross, actually highlighted that his Labour Scottish MP colleagues have betrayed the women. So these women have done their best to make their way in the world of unequal pay and the persistent gender pension gap. And what we've seen from Labour over the past few weeks is a shocking betrayal of trust that has understandably left WASPI women reeling. And it's not just disappointment, Mr O'Kane, it's massive frustration. Monica Lennon.
Monica Lennon.
Just to prove Christine Graham right, there is an issue with the buttons, but I'm grateful to Tess White for giving way. Does she not agree that what we should try and do to best help the WASPI women is focus on what we agree on? And in this Parliament today, we agree in justice and fair compensation for the women. Rather than pick out individuals who could say more or do more, we've given examples of where Labour colleagues are doing their very best. We know we've got a long way to go, but does Tess White agree, let's focus on what we agree on, unite and speak with one voice for the WASPI women?
Tess White, I can give you the time back.
Thank you, Monica Lennon. I wonder if Keir Starmer is going to give you a vote on this and actually listen.
Through the chair, Ms. White.
Listen to his colleagues here in the chamber today, because I hope, and I've had it confirmed today, that you show that you're shocked and angry.
Through the chair, please, Ms. White.
Not just because Liz Kendall has rejected the PHSO recommendation for compensation entirely, and not even considering a more targeted scheme that could help the most vulnerable. So, Monica Lennon, yes, if you could work with your colleagues and agree a way forward, that would be a good track ahead. So where presiding officer is the compassion, care and understanding that was promised when Labour sat on the opposition benches, as Labour candidates chapped on the doors and up and down the country during the general election? Where was the honesty? Presiding officer, will I get the time back?
You will get the time back. Can I just advise the Chamber that it does appear that the requests for interventions are working, but there is a delay. So patience is again a virtue. Paul O'Kane, we're looking into it.
I was going to defend Christine Graham by referring to the sticky buttons, I think is probably the best way to put it. Tess White is making a number of points here. We've outlined clearly the Scottish Labour Party position. Can she just confirm to me, in the 14 years the Conservative Party were in power, what action did she take on WASPI women? What did she raise with subsequent Secretaries of State and Ministers? When the PHSO report came to Mel Stride, and he made many points in the Chamber not accepting parts of that recommendation, what did she say then? And what would her plan plan have been for compensation had she still been in government?
Tess White, I can give you time back for both those interventions.
Thank you. There were multiple investigations, and what we're talking today is about betrayal of promises and the recommendations from the Ombudsman. So the PHSO's final report, and I think my Labour colleagues might need to look at it because that's what we're talking about today, was published in March 2024. Keir Starmer and his team knew about the Ombudsman's findings and the recommendation for compensation long before Liz Kendall's dispassionate announcement in December. Presiding Officer, at its heart, this issue is about honesty, it's about transparency and it's about trust. It's about the pledges politicians make and the promises that they must fulfil. And it's not always easy as policymakers. It is right we're careful with the public purse, but the cack-handed way Keir Starmer's government has approached the question of compensation for WASPy women, and it's not just a disappointment, Mr O'Kane, it's an absolute outrage. To give false hope, to lead women up the garden path, it's just not right. The party claiming to stand up for fairness and justice has not only turned its back on millions of women, it has started pointing the finger at them. But let's not forget, Presiding Officer, that Labour supported the SNP's Gender Recognition Reform Bill in the Scottish Parliament with little regard to the rights of women and girls. Let's not forget the Labour's cut to the winter fuel payment, impacting millions of pensioners across the UK and putting lives at risk during the winter months. My Scottish Labour colleagues can shake their heads today and try and spin their way out of this, but Labour do not have, I'm closing, Presiding Officer, but Labour do not have pensioners' best interests at heart. They do not have women's best interests at heart. Presiding Officer, in closing, from farmers to pensioners, businesses and WASPy women, Labour's mask has well and truly slipped. They have played politics with serious policy decisions and left good and decent people to pick up the pieces.
Thank you, Ms White. Before calling the Cabinet Secretary to close the debate, and with apologies to Christine Graham, there did appear to be an issue in a delay with the request for intervention to come on. The lights were working, but there was a delay. That delay now appears no longer to be in place. But where there is the request for intervention, I would encourage members to go back to old school and to request that, as well as pressing the buttons. A point of order, Christine Graham.
Your word, Presiding Officer, and a pressed intervention and a delayed right to speak came up instead. And this is not an age matter.
In denying it was a point of order, I never for a moment suggested it was an age matter, Ms Graham. But the issue does appear to be resolved, but those wishing to make an intervention, and we have a little bit of time in hand, as I say, should seek to make that known in the customary fashion. And I call the Cabinet Secretary a generous 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. In 2019, Keir Starmer called for an end to, and I quote, the real injustice faced by WASPy women. What a disappointment, therefore, it is to all of us that have been involved in this campaign, but particularly to the WASPy women themselves, when the most recent quotes have gone along the lines of, I'm afraid to say that taxpayers simply can't afford the tens of billions of pounds in compensation when the evidence shows that 90% of those impacted did know about it. That's because of the state of our economy. So somehow the fault lies with the WASPy women as well as the Tories on this issue. And that again goes back to the attempts by Labour, and again we've heard it during this debate, to challenge the mere premise of what has been happening to WASPy women over the year. Now, Paul O'Kane has said that the UK Government has offered apology. Many Labour members have pointed to this, and they were right to do so, Presiding Officer, and the Government was right to make that apology. Paul O'Kane was also right to say that it's good that the ministers have said that mistakes won't happen in the future. Neither of those points help the WASPy women one single bit. And Labour members have pointed to the financial mess that they were left. Again, a perfectly reasonable point to make. That is not the fault of the WASPI women either, presiding officer. So while context is important, justice is also important, and delivering justice is the most important issue that we've been talking about today. Now, Labour members have talked about the fact that there will be some action, that they support that something should happen. Can I respectfully say to them today, women don't have the luxury of time of waiting. They don't need another review. What they need is action. They deserve, are entitled to action. We simply cannot kick this into the long grass any more, presiding officer. Douglas Ross raised a number of important points in his speech. He spoke about the role of the Ombudsman, and I think that's an exceptionally important point to make, because governments ignore the recommendations of an Ombudsman at their peril. Many members, Jeremy Balfour, George Adam and Douglas Ross, talked about trust, and that trust in our institutions and our politicians is an important thing. And so it is, and it is further diminished if a government ignores the recommendations of an Ombudsman in this manner. It does a service to all of us, but most importantly, it does a disservice to the WASPI women. And another point that Douglas Ross made, which I think he's quite right to do so and hasn't been regularly picked up, is the tone of the statement that was made by the Secretary of State. I have to say I was astonished when I first read it, because the Secretary of State says that she has ruled out all options that were presented by the Ombudsman. She goes on to say that the government hasn't taken this decision lightly, but we believe it's the right course of action because the great majority of the women knew the state pension age was increasing, sending letters earlier wouldn't have made a difference for most, and the proposed compensation scheme isn't fair or value for taxpayers' money. The UK government is casting doubt on the basis of the Ombudsman's report. It's casting doubt on the basis of the WASPI Women's campaign. And that's why I'm sorry, despite the fact that many Scottish Labour members wish it wasn't true, the UK government has utterly closed the door on compensation for WASPI women. And I'm afraid if Scottish Labour MSPs think anything different, they are kidding themselves, presiding officer. And that's why I do have a problem with the Labour amendment today. I've already mentioned that WASPI women don't have the time to wait to figure out what's the best way to receive compensation. I've talked about the tone of the statement which the Secretary of State made, which shows that that door has been firmly closed. And the fact that an apology is welcome, it's not enough. And I'm afraid the Labour amendment today gives the UK government an opportunity to deflect, to delay, to dither, to disappoint, and that is not enough, presiding officer. WASPI women deserve better than deflection, and I'm afraid that's what the amendment from Scottish Labour actually does today.
Paul O'Kane.
Grateful to the Cabinet Secretary for giving way. That is certainly not the intention of the amendment that I brought in good faith to this chamber. I like to find the consensus. I think consensus is important. I think we heard a lot from various speeches today about the importance that the Parliament speaks with one voice. I think what's clear is there are variations in detriment around maladministration, and we are seeking to recognise that, and that system could be put in place that would recognise that. Does the Cabinet Secretary not agree?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think the member makes a fair point if, and I think it was Kevin Stewart which pointed to the timing of the very first report on this, was 2004. Yeah. WASPI women don't have the time to figure out another way. The Ombudsman has looked at this for years, and people may have different views on this, presiding officer. They may have different alternatives. The Scottish Government certainly has a different alternative and doesn't think the Ombudsman goes far enough. But for goodness sake, the last thing that WASPI women need is more time wasted on more reports. Because members have spoken today in their contributions about what it means for women. Members have spoken about the hundreds of thousands of women that are affected, and we're quite right to talk about the scale of the problem here. But we can never forget that each single woman has a devastating story to tell themselves. Every single woman and their family. They must be heard, but the UK Government must act. The Ombudsman has laid out how they can do that. Now, Maggie Chapman again quite rightly pointed out, as have others, that the hopes of women were dashed when the new Labour Government came in and nothing changed. In fact, it got a whole lot worse. Beatrice Wishart was quite right to point to the many Labour MSPs who spoke last week and this week, and she's right to do so. And can I pay tribute to them myself? It's not easy to hold a principled stance, particularly when you have long fought for a Labour government to come in at Westminster and you have to listen to a Secretary of State from your own party and your Prime Minister making the contributions they've made. So I absolutely do pay tribute to Monica Lennon, to Carol Mochan, to Clayton Clark and others for the principled stand that they have taken over many years on this issue and that they will continue to take. And I pay credit once again for their contributions today. Now, it does appear from what has been said, Presiding Officer, that Scottish Labour will be voting for the Government motion today, and I welcome that. Douglas Ross and I both challenged Michael Mara about how Labour MPs would vote on this. Now, it's not often, so I think it's actually unique in my time in government that I spend so much time talking about Douglas Ross in agreement, at least, in a speech. But he's quite right to point out the difficulties with Michael Mara's reply on this, Presiding Officer, because I know how SNP MPs will vote on this. I know how Lib Dem MPs will vote on this, and Beatrice Wishart has been quite right to point out the work that they've been doing to seek a vote down in Westminster. I still don't know how Scottish Labour MPs, who were so quick to stand beside WASPy women just last year before an election campaign, will vote. But the public will not forget how they'd make their decisions. But regardless of that point, Presiding Officer, because time will tell on that, we do have the opportunity to speak with one voice tonight. And that doesn't actually happen very often on a policy matter within the Scottish Parliament. That is a good thing if we do get to that position after decision time. I mentioned in a contribution to Monica Lennon earlier on that there will be a letter to the UK Government following the vote tonight. That is indeed the case. What I would do is invite all parties to sign up to that letter. Let us speak with one voice, truly, Presiding Officer, because this Government is not going to walk away after decision time, after we've pressed our buttons and once again said that we are absolutely devastated and disappointed by the UK Government. We're not going to walk away and then move on to the next issue. That letter is once again another step, another opportunity for all of us to come together to support our WASPy women. And I will be pleased to send a draft of that letter to opposition spokespeople after decision time tonight, asking for their parties to support the Government on this issue. We need to move forward to take as much action as we can, Presiding Officer, on this issue. Because the Ombudsman have had their say. The UK Government must now act. It is time to do the right thing, and it's time to compensate the WASPy women without delay. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. That concludes the debate on compensation for WASPy women. It's now time to move on to the next item of business, which is consideration of business motion 16184 in the name of Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau on changes to business. Any member who wishes to speak to the motion should press their request to speak button now. And I call on Jamie Hepburn to move the motion.
I move the motion, which members will notice allows us to accommodate timing for consideration of amendments laid for stage 3 of Christine Graham's Welfare of Dogs Bill, and also the addition of 2 parliamentary statements relating to matters of significance, matters of importance. I'm sure the Chamber, all members in the Chamber, will want the opportunity to ask questions of the Government on.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. No member has asked to speak to the motion. Therefore, the question is that motion 16184 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed. And there are 2 questions Point of order, Neil Gray.
My appreciation, Presiding Officer. I'd like to make a point of order under Rule 16.2, Section 3. I've today written to you, Presiding Officer, in light of the points of order raised today by Stephen Kerr and Neil Bibby. I did so after reviewing the official report of my statement on the 14th of November last year. In it, I was explicitly clear that not all meetings require to be minuted. However, summary notes are often available, and that notes would be available for the majority of the engagements that had been reported on. I've also reviewed my answer that day to Mr Bibby. In it, I said I believed that there was a note available for all meetings, but I was explicitly clear in saying, and I quote, "I will need to double-check." I believe that both my formal statement to the Chamber and my answer to Mr Bibby are unambiguous and accurate. However, I have also reviewed my answer to Stephen Kerr. In it, in relation to the summaries of the meeting, I stated, and I quote, "Those summaries will be available for all the engagements that I have been participating in," end quote. Despite being clear earlier in the session that I would need to check, I recognise that I asserted that there would be summaries available for all the engagements. It has since come to light that this is incorrect, and I am sorry for that inadvertent error. Under Rule 16.2 and the provisions of the guidance on correcting the record, members have 20 days to make any correction to the official report. That time has unfortunately passed, and so I am seeking your guidance now, Presiding Officer, on how I can best make members aware of the position I have set out today.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. A member, as you have noted, can seek to correct any inaccuracy on their part within 20 days of the publication of the official report of the relevant proceedings, and clearly that time has passed. I have not yet had an opportunity to read the letter the Cabinet Secretary has sent. However, the Cabinet Secretary has now put the matter on the record today, and in order to ensure that the correction is as widely known as possible, I would encourage him and welcome his intention to write to me, and would also ask that he writes to the business managers, to any members who are not represented on the Parliamentary Bureau, and to ensure that a copy rests with SPICE. Thank you very much. Point of order, Douglas Ross.
Further to the subsequent apology we've now had from the Health Secretary about this situation, I think it's the second time he's had to come to the Chamber to apologise for his conduct on this matter. This was, as Stephen Kerr pointed out earlier today, subject of a Freedom of Information request, which the Government would have released to a Sunday newspaper, which was published last week. It's now Tuesday. Our standing orders are very clear that a member must correct the official record as quickly as possible. Therefore, can I ask what discussion there was at Bureau earlier today from the Minister for Parliamentary Business? Because clearly Scottish Government ministers knew about this when they released the FOI, and at the very latest on Sunday when the article appeared. Was there any notification to you, Presiding Officer, that the Health Secretary would seek to apologise and correct the record, not after two members made points of order, but when this became very clear in the media at the weekend?
Thank you, Mr Ross. I can confirm that there was no discussion at Bureau today. We will move on to the two questions that are to be put as a result of today's business. The first is that amendment 16160.1 in the name of Paul O'Kane, which seeks to amend motion 16160 in the name of Shirley Ann Somerville on compensation for WASPI women be agreed. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we'll move to a vote, and there will be a short suspension to allow members to access the digital voting system.